I'm the creative director of Cogs Marvel. Cogs Marvel, we are a brand experience agency. We've an office here in Dublin. We've another one in San Francisco. I think there's about 75 of us in total. We do stuff all over the world. So I guess what I want to talk to you a bit about is how we talk about ourselves, and hopefully that isn't just sort of something that seems like a sales pitch, because I guess we've got kind of very strong views about how we think our industry should be, or how the things we do can be done a lot better and a lot more impactfully. So I guess I'm sharing this stuff in the hope that you can appropriate it as well as engage with it. This is what we say about ourselves. Experiences are what we create. Changing people is what we do. So there's lots of words in there, and I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about some of those words and what's important in those words. But before we do that, I want to do a little experiment. A little bit of audience participation. So, simple question. What is that? Okay. Have I got entirely consensus around this as a chair? Any other takers on? A relaxing device. A place to sit. Okay. A body support. Okay, so we're all fairly happy that this is a chair or something that's another description for a chair. And, you know, being able to answer a question like that in a simple, straightforward way is a very useful thing to be able to do. Because you walk into a room and you go, oh, I need to sit down. And you sit down. You probably don't even think this is a chair. You just use it for what it is. Okay? Okay, so let's go on a little bit. What's that? Would you care to demonstrate? It's an upside down chair.
Art.
It could be art. Okay, so if I take these things that I've brought with me and do this. Now what is it?
A cozy chair.
A cozy chair. It's art.
A dryer.
It's a dryer. Okay, so far so good. Now what is it? It's a chair. It's an upside down dryer. Okay. All right, so what's this all about? Ooh, look, it's a chair. Maybe not. So it starts off, it's simply a chair, but how we use words matters. Yeah. So no, it's not. It's used as a chair. Might seem like a tiny little difference, but that shift from seeing something as a thing always, forever, it only has one purpose, and looking at it and saying, well, I can see what I'm going to use it for, but maybe it could be something else. Yeah? So, for me, the word create. So, experiences are what we create. For me, creating essentially boils down to that. It's the act of looking for possibilities, of loosening the edges of things. You don't have to take the thing apart and, you know, entirely rearrange it. Very small little shift in something can make a huge difference to what it is or how it's used or what it can be. Yeah? And this is like, I'm a creative, so I work for Cogs Marvel now. I've been there for 2.5 years. Before that, I was what you might loosely call an ad guy. So I made ads for many years. And some of the things Colin said would resonate with me in the sense that, you know, when you make ads, the first thing you have to recognize is that most people out there don't give a damn. They walk by the posters you make, they change channels for the TV ads, you put up a pre-roll on YouTube and they're looking at the skip thing counting down to zeros, deliberately not looking at the thing that you spent all that money on. So people don't want to see your stuff. So you have to work very hard to get them to pay attention. So as a creative, I guess one of the givens is, one of those tools is surprise people, interrupt them, challenge them. If what you're saying is straightforward and obvious, then it gets processed the way a traffic light does. I absorb the information, I do what I need to do, and then I forget about it. Yeah, so, yeah, some examples. A couple of years ago, Lidl came to us, and they had this activation at the ploughing championships, and they had this big barn, and it was full of food. And we said, well, does it have to be a barn? Maybe it can be a big shopping trolley. Yeah. At the time, they had a campaign that was talking or using shopping trolleys, using people pushing around shopping trolleys. So we thought this could be a nice way to bring that campaign into this space. Now budget didn't allow for the baby in the end, but we did make the shopping trolley. Yeah. So it was a barn. Now it's a shopping trolley. Now, your turn. A little bit more audience participation. Just for a moment, can you all look around the room, find something, and think of another use for it? Any use at all?
The pipes could be chocolate or some drinks instead of air.
They could. They could. Breathing chocolate. I like the sound of that. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Cactus could be a focus stand.
A which? The cactus could. It could. Yeah.
The glass upside down could be a can holder.
It could. Okay, so that's the essence of it, and as a creative, it's very much it's a practice or a habit that you just sort of instinctively see everything as not just what it is, but what it might be, and most of those might be's are frankly rubbish, and you just discard those, and every so often, like a pebble on the beach, you find something that's a little bit more interesting. Yeah, so that's the essence of it. So I'm not sure what the next slide is. It's that one. Yes. Okay. But one last question to you before we move on from this is: did anybody think about another use for a person?
I'm thinking about my husband now.
Okay, well, the reason I asked that question is that when you want to change someone's behavior or you want to change their attitude, you're effectively changing them. You're finding another use for their time, their energy. And I say that, first of all, to say you can do it, and we do that all the time. But the other thing is to say that should give you some sense of that this is hard. Our lives are already full of our thought processes and our ways of behaving and the things that we care about. And you're trying to interrupt that and say, here, do something else. Yeah? So, partly, knowing it's hard, what that says to me is we can't just do the same thing all the time and expect it to work. We need to work harder. Yeah? So, as I said, we're going to talk about words, so maybe this is a little controversial. Just quick show of hands, who works in events? So most people are fairly comfortable with that description. Yeah? Okay, I'm going to try and challenge you a little bit on whether, it's fine, but maybe there are other ways you can look at it. So, an event is a thing. It's an object, it's like a rock, You can sit in the ground doing nothing. You can turn it into a beautiful object. You can use it for violence. You can, it has any number of purposes. But of itself, it's kind of inert. Yeah? Experience. Experience is a different kind of word. Now, there are some words that we use and we get very kind of aggressive about that they have to be used in the way that they are meant. Some people go, yeah, okay, we used to call ourselves events, now we do experiences. It's the same thing, we just give it a different name. It's not. Like, give me an example. What is an experience?
A bad experience, a good experience,
Yeah.
or a weird experience.
Okay.
It's
So-
things interacting with one another.
Yes, it is.
Connects with your senses.
It does.
Generates a response.
Yeah.
It's an emotional engagement.
So the way I like to think about this is if you came into work on Monday morning and you go into the kitchen and you make yourself a cup of coffee and somebody says to you, how was your weekend? And you say, well, yeah, I had an experience. They'll perk up, they'll go, they'll expect you to say something interesting. You say, well, oh really, what did you do? I said, yeah, well, I went out and I got the newspaper and I read it and had a cup of coffee with my friend and it's not an experience, it's just a thing, yeah? So, an experience has an effect, yeah? And that's why we say experiences are what we create, yeah? So, it takes, it doesn't necessarily the case, a lot of things that exist and are familiar can have an effect, but creation can make an experience more impactful because at a basic level, it's just different, yeah? So that's why we say experiences are what we create. Now, so going on from that, this is the business we are in. And again, this isn't just words. Like marketing is defined by an intent. Marketers have budgets, and budgets are designed to achieve purposes, and they are measured, and if they don't achieve them, they get taken away. So if we all acknowledge that we're in marketing, it's not to say that there aren't, like Colin was talking about the importance of operations and having people who can execute things. It's absolutely crucial. So for some people, what they're executing doesn't matter. It just needs to be executed perfectly. But for it to be marketing, it has to matter, or it's nothing. Yeah. So, changing people is what we do. So, this is the other side of that. So, when you say the experience has an effect, what is that effect? That effect is in some way a change on people. And the reason we separate those thoughts out, we don't just say, we create experiences that change people, is that we want to emphasize it. That, you can create an experience, but if it doesn't change people, then what's the point? So you always have to remind ourselves that changing people is the goal. And the other goal, of course, is you have to get them there in the first place in order to be able to change them. So I want to talk about an example now. So this is all familiar enough to all of us, I guess. A little bit over 10 years ago now, a lot of things went very, very badly wrong. And banks, which, probably had a fairly decent reputation, like your local bank manager was someone who would help you. It entirely changed, turned on its head. Bankers were suddenly the most evil people in the planet. Anyway, a few years ago, AIB came to us, it was about 2 years ago, and said, we want to run a conference about sustainability. Now, first of all, just to give you a little bit of context, they didn't mean sustainability in the way that we usually use that word. They didn't mean we're going to recycle our cups. So straight away there's a problem, that the name isn't great, yeah, or the context or the subject isn't great. But what they really meant about sustainability is they wanted to talk to SMEs, NGOs, and various other interest people about creating a sustainable banking system. Yeah? And honestly, our first reaction is, are you serious? Like, are you ready for the crap that's going to rain down on you when you say this? And they said, actually, we are. So we're willing to say, yes, we made some mistakes. Yes, we made some really, really bad mistakes. And we should have said this 15 years ago, but we're saying it now. I said, okay. So going on from that, then we said, okay, but there's a problem. It's just not that interesting. Now, if we were in California, and some of our colleagues in California pointed that out, that you can't say that in California. They're obsessed with sustainability. Yeah, they can't imagine a world in which people aren't obsessed with sustainability. But that's our world. Yeah. So we went back and we said, look, there's a problem here. It's not that interesting, and the challenge to us was, so how do we make it interesting? So this is the point about how do you get people to even be in the room before you get to have an effect on them? So the first thing is you have to make it interesting. So our insight, and insight is another word that we hold up in big letters and insist that it means what it says. So if I say to you, I've got an insight, in just simple terms, it has to be insightful. Yeah? It has to surprise. It has to be something that isn't something that everybody knows or that everybody thinks about all the time. Yeah? Insight is rare and it needs to be valuable. So our insight in this was they were talking to businesses. So 5-year plans, 2-year plans, all of that sort of stuff. What about if sustainability in a business sense and in a societal sense even meant building a business that has the potential to live beyond your own lifetime? All of these brands were those kind of brands that, most of them grew up early in the 20th century. They are household names. Who's setting up a business doesn't imagine somewhere in the back of their head that it would be great to be one of these, to be Ford, to be Unilever, to be whatever. Yeah, pick your favorite brand. So we wanted to position this conference as being an important part of creating such a legacy for the benefit of all. So that was the insight. Now that's only the first bit of the process. You have a problem, you need an insight. That gives you a strategy which you can then move on into creating the idea that brings it to life. So our idea was based around this, that the kitchen table is the boardroom of life. The chair is cropping up again. So what we meant by that is that in Ireland in particular, the center of the home is the kitchen. All that stuff, all of that banking crisis, where that was most keenly felt was in people's homes, in their families. But also, this is where the ideas for businesses are hatched. Yeah? And it's also when businesses have their ups and downs, when they have their successes, this is where those successes are felt most. Yeah? This is where you eat the bread that's won. It's where you cry the tears when it all goes badly. It's where you sit up late at night doing your accounts and trying to make it all work. Yeah? So it seemed to us that in this notion of sustainable banking leading to sustainable business, leading to sustainable society, the heart of that is the kitchen. Yeah? But there's another twist to this, which was the important piece, really. And that was that, as I said, this is AIB wanting to talk about all this stuff. And what right did they have to say any of it? And a lot of what they wanted to talk about was, in their terms, their social license. They said, we have a banking license. That's fine. The government says we can run a bank. But do the people say we can run a bank? And that's what the social license is. So what we did was take that kitchen table. This was the sketch concept we presented. And for me, as a creative, there was a lovely moment that goes with this, which was the client that we presented it to actually sort of about 2 slides after this. I could see that she was not paying any attention. I thought, oh God, I'm in trouble here. I've lost her completely. So I kind of stopped and said, so you got any questions or you got any, She said, no. She said, you had me at kitchen. And she was just off in the resonance of this and how this was absolutely perfect in terms of the story that they wanted to tell. So this is the sketch, yeah, and executing this, the reality of it was very similar. This was the event, yeah. This is Bernard Byrne, yeah, he's the CEO of AIB. I forget her name, she's a journalist, she sort of curated the whole discussion. But this kitchen works. You can make tea, you can cook toast, and they did. And we built the floor of the kitchen all the way out underneath the seating, and the seating is deliberately raked and in a sort of an amphitheater style. We didn't put any confidence monitors, or we hid them, so that people would feel as much like they were in the kitchen. Yeah? And what happened here was Bernard Byrne basically sat in a kitchen and spoke humbly about everything they had done wrong and about everything they wanted to do right. And that totally changed the tenor of the conversation, made it that much more impactful, made people engage with what they were saying and believe it in a way that they might not have otherwise. So, in a way, back to what we were saying about experiences, it's easy to imagine that an experience has to be something dramatic, but sometimes it's something subtle. And this one was subtle but impactful. Yeah? And said his comment afterwards, it was the most exciting presentation I've ever done in a truly unique setting that served to focus everyone's attention on how AIB is reframing sustainability. And we didn't write the things that people said, but we created a context, and everyone who spoke that day referred to the space they were in, and they made cups of tea and they had chats, and it just humanized the whole thing. Yeah. So anyway, that I think is, yeah, so that's that story, and at the core of this is three important words. Insight. Yeah. And insight has to be insightful. Idea. An idea is something that comes out of the creative process. That process is as simple as loosening the edges of things. You know, looking at saying, just because he's the CEO of a bank, he doesn't have to stand at a podium and give a formal presentation. Small shift like that can have a huge impact. And experience measured as something that has a definable, measurable impact. Yeah? That someone can go away and say, I want to tell somebody about this. Yeah? So, well, there's a couple of other things. This is just last weekend. This is a project that it's an ongoing project. This is just the first piece of it. Bord Iascaigh Mhara, the Irish Seafood Fisheries Authority, they run a program where fishermen collect ocean plastic and bring it back to harbours to be recycled. Most people don't know that. Most people think fishermen are the ones who create the problem. So down at Seafest in Cork, amongst other things, we created a piece of street theatre that was all about talking to young children and families about the fishermen and what the fishermen were doing. This is the end of a sort of a 15-minute piece where a group of children from the audience are brought up to put pieces of plastic into the fishing for litter recycling bin. It's a lot of fun, a lot of humour in it, but a serious message behind it. So this is another piece from the same, so there was a series of activations that we did. This is literally representing the average adult in Ireland creates 60 kilos of plastic waste a year. This is 60 kilos of plastic waste. So sometimes just simply visualizing something in a way that you can relate to makes that point. And this is actually a project I worked on before. I worked with Cogs Marvel. I just thought I'd throw it in because it features seating again, when seating is not seating. This is from the Smithwick's experience in Kilkenny, which you're probably all familiar with the storehouse, which tells the story of Guinness. In Kilkenny, there's a smaller thing that tells the story of Smithwick's. This was created from scratch about 4 years ago in an old building. The brewery was being shut down, but they wanted to keep the story of the brand alive. So what this was about, in its essence, was repositioning Smithwick's from being sort of a fuddy-duddy old beer brand to being the best craft beer brand. So it's all about craft and how, you can go off and learn to brew beer in 2 days for a weekend, and people do it and they say, I'm a craft brewer. But they've been doing it for 50 years longer than Guinness. So this is the whole story of that. And so this is a representation of the house where it all began, which was the first house in Kilkenny with running water, hence the bats. And we created a bunch of this kind of Harry Potter-esque, the portraits all come to life and talk to one another and tell the story of the family. Yeah. So I think that might be all I've got. Yeah, just to recap. That's, say, experiences are what we create, changing people is what we do. And the short version, and the most important piece, I know Colin doesn't like taglines, but this is a tagline that talks to us more than to anyone else. We have to always remind ourselves that we change people. That's what we're trying to do, that's what we have to do, and if we're not doing it, we're not doing our jobs. And we don't mind saying that. We don't mind standing up in front of clients and saying, if we're not doing this, we are not doing our job. So that's me. Thank you for your time.